When Jasmine Crockett stormed that stage, it wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. Seated across from her was Candace Owens, armed with sound bites and sarcasm, calling her a spokeswoman for emotional politics. But the entire room was silenced by what happened next. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't shout. She dropped a name that shattered the illusion, speaking one sentence and opening one folder. Faces fell. The audience froze. Vanished was Candace's smile. What Jasmine exposed made one of the loudest voices in America completely shut down. Stay with us. This story is worth every second of your time. The lights didn't rise. They struck. Two beams sliced through the darkness from opposite ends of the stage, catching every speck of dust in the air, like sparks from a detonated silence. Emerging from the left was Jasmine Crockett, with steady, restrained resolve, her heels precise, her jaw set like someone about to argue with God. From the right came Candace Owens. No hesitation, no smile, draped in a red suit that caught every camera's hunger. The audience held its breath as if they knew the night would not be about policy, but power. Owens didn't wait for applause. She didn't glance left. She walked straight to the podium, gripped its edge with both hands, and leaned forward like a prosecutor preparing to shred a verdict before she spoke. "I didn't come here to be liked," she said, her voice surgical, clipped and sharp. "I came here to tell the truth." Gas rippled through the rows like a body twitching before rigor mortis. Crockett didn't flinch. She stood beneath her spotlight like a shadow forged in steel. Arms relaxed, eyes cold. She didn't blink. The camera zoomed in tighter and tighter, capturing every refusal to react, every micro-expression. Owens pivoted toward her, voice rising like a knife slicing silk. "For 60 years, Owens declared, Black America has been held hostage, not by chains, but by the lies of the Democratic Party." A murmur cracked the room, not of disagreement, but electricity, the kind that comes before thunder. Crockett tilted her head slightly, but said nothing. Not yet, she didn't need to. Owens had fired the first shot, but Crockett was just loading, and with the silence she left hanging like a blade in midair. Owens stepped into it, not to fill the silence, but to use it like a weapon. She moved forward with purpose, her heels striking the floor in perfect rhythm, not too fast, not too slow, like she had all the time in the world and nothing to fear. Her chin stayed high, eyes locked on the crowd, daring someone, anyone, to interrupt her. The lights followed her like she owned them. She stopped just short of center stage, and turned to face the room. "Let's be clear," she said, voice low, but full of steel. "Black folks don't need saving from the government." The words sliced clean through the air. A few eyebrows raised, most froze. She didn't blink. "And we sure don't need politicians who just happen to look like us, standing in front of a camera, pretending they know our lives." She paced one step, lifting her hand toward the audience. "The people you cheer for. They're not lifting us up. They're keeping us stuck. Stuck in a story where we're always struggling, always angry, always waiting for help." She turned slightly toward Crockett now, just enough. "And the folks who say they represent us," she said, raising her voice just a little, "they don't want us to succeed. They want us to stay frustrated because angry people keep voting." She returned to the podium with a slow breath, gripping the sides like she was holding something back. Not emotion, but calculation. "Let's talk about Black Lives Matter," she said. It wasn't a movement. It was a brand. It sold pain like merchandise. Gas stirred like waves. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped. More dangerous that way. They raised tens of millions. But where did it go? Did your neighborhood get a school? Did your block get a business? Did your kids get a future? She paused just long enough. No. But somebody got a house in Malibu. The silence in the room cracked. Not from noise, but from tension. People shifted in their seats. Some eyes darted toward Crockett, others locked on Owens, either stunned or entranced. "You were sold grief, dressed up like justice," she said, steady and cold. "And a lot of you bought it." And then, like she had saved the sharpest edge for last, she leaned in and finished it. "We don't need anyone's pity. We need the truth, and the truth is work, family, responsibility, not tears. That's the way forward." The moment hung like a hammer mid-swing and then crack. Applause erupted from the right side of the hall. It wasn't polite. It was loud, sharp, and certain. Some even stood clapping hard, proud. But the left side, silent, still tense. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They weren't won over. They were watching. And in that heavy pause between cheers and quiet, the camera turned slowly toward Jasmine Crockett. She blinked once, and in that tiny movement, the entire room tightened like it had just realized. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was war. The clapping didn't shake her. It sharpened her because Jasmine Crockett didn't come here to win applause. She came to remind the room why the fight exists in the first place. She stepped forward with deliberate force, not as a counter to applause, but as a response to something heavier, the kind of silence that tries to erase memory. Her heels struck the floor like soft thunder, but her presence said more than volume ever could. She didn't look at Owens, not this time. Her eyes were locked on the rows of faces that had flinched, the ones who had turned their heads when Owens spoke of freedom like it was a prize to be earned. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. What she carried wasn't noise. It was history. How many of you in this room, she began, tone low but unwavering, have been told, keep your voice down. Don't make it a big deal. Or just be grateful you got something. The room stilled. You could hear the breath catching in throats. Crockett's gaze didn't wander. She held them there in that quiet. You were told your anger was too loud. Your questions were too much. Your presence was a problem. She let those final 5 words hang like a slow-burning match. She didn't blink. She didn't offer comfort. She wasn't here for that. This was not a call for sympathy. It was a reckoning. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached into her blazer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not dramatic, surgical. This is SB 1, she said, unfolding the page like it was evidence at a trial. Passed in Texas, my home. The weight of that sentence wasn't geographic. It was personal. Her fingers didn't shake. Her voice didn't lift. It narrowed. You know what it does. It limits early voting. It restricts mailing ballots. Then her tone turned razor sharp. And guess where those cuts hit the hardest? She didn't pause for effect. She answered herself before anyone else could blink. Black and brown communities. Places like Oak Cliff, like Acres Homes, like East Austin. Each place name was a pulse. Each name carried blood. The silence in the hall wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Quiet, collective, and tight. This law doesn't just make it harder to vote, she continued, voice now firm, grounded. It makes it harder to be heard. And then she lifted the document, not to wave it, but to show it like a receipt, like a bill someone had to pay. She let the paper speak for itself before turning slowly, this time toward Owens, and her final line, delivered like a scalpel, sliced straight through the air. If we don't even get to choose who speaks for us, then how can you call that freedom? The moment didn't explode. It ignited. One row on the far left stirred. A woman in her 50s stood slowly, her arms crossed, not in defiance, but in dignity. Then another, then a man near the back. It wasn't applause. It was something deeper, the rising of people who'd been told to sit down for decades. There were no cheers, no chants, just the sound of standing, soft, steady, and undeniable. And Jasmine Crockett, she didn't flinch. She just stood in the fire she had lit and made room for others to rise. The crowd was still echoing from Crockett's final words when Owens took a slow step forward, not to answer, but to reclaim the moment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. What came next didn't just aim at Crockett. It aimed at everything she stood for. Owens stopped just left of center, one hand resting on her hip, the other lightly gesturing toward the audience. Her expression was calm but confident, like someone about to share a hard truth, not to wound, but to correct. You want to talk about where I come from, she said, her tone smooth and sure. I grew up in a neighborhood where dreams got shut down before they ever started. Her words were firm, not emotional. There was no big government check coming to save me, no politician showing up with a solution. She took one step forward, steady and slow. I made it out, not because someone gave me something, but because I got up, I worked hard, and I didn't wait for permission. She turned slightly toward Crockett, but didn't point. I didn't need a Democrat to hand me a future, she said, locking eyes with a row of students near the front. I built mine without a welfare check and without a pity vote. Her voice wasn't angry. It was measured, practiced, like she'd said it before and knew the silence that would follow. In the crowd, some nodded in agreement, others leaned back, their faces unreadable. Crockett didn't flinch. Then Owens shifted tone, from personal story to political fire. You know what I see in leaders like her, she asked, tilting her head toward Crockett. I see spokespeople for a fake humanitarian system. She took a long breath, letting the word fake sink in. A system that talks about compassion but hides ambition, that preaches justice but is built to control people, not free them. The air grew heavier, not loud, just dense, like everyone was suddenly paying closer attention. They talk about justice, Owens repeated. But what they really want is control. She turned fully now, facing the center. They don't serve the people, they serve their brand. There was a sharp pause, and then the line that landed like a dagger. I don't need to play the victim to succeed. Her voice had dropped an octave. Slower, colder, more final. But you, what about you? That last sentence was personal. Delivered without raising her voice, but with enough weight to shift the air. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. And Jasmine Crockett, standing a few feet away, didn't say a word. She didn't roll her eyes or shake her head. She reached into her jacket slowly, carefully, and pulled out a thick manila folder. She didn't wave it around. She didn't explain what was inside. She simply held it calmly at her side like it had been waiting. No one moved. No one spoke. Cameras zoomed in. The room, for a moment, stopped breathing. Owens had brought her voice. Crockett had just brought her evidence. And the stage, for that one long second, belonged to neither woman but to the silence between them. The silence in the room had become a kind of pressure, the kind you feel in your chest, like thunder waiting to crack the air. Crockett didn't rush to fill it. Instead, she moved with the same deliberate calm of someone who knew that truth didn't need volume, just clarity. She returned to the podium, but this time not with fire in her voice, but something heavier, memory. Her hands, steady yet precise, reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. From it she pulled a thick document bound in a black clip. The cover page bore no title, just numbers, bill numbers, rows and rows of them. She held them up without theatrics. I want to show you something, she said quietly. But the microphone carried her voice like it was carved in stone. The cameras tightened their frame. Her fingers flipped each page slowly, revealing the names of actual laws, not theories, not metaphors, signed and passed within the last 2 years. These aren't headlines. These aren't tweets. These are the tools that shape your world while you're too busy surviving it. Her voice sharpened as she lifted one sheet high. Here's the bill that slashed funding for community clinics in neighborhoods like mine. She dropped it to the table with a soft smack. Here's another that banned discussions of systemic racism in classrooms. Not just for college students, but for third graders. Another page dropped. And this is SB 1 out of Texas. The one that closed down polling stations near black communities. The one that cut Sunday voting. Another page and another. The sound of paper hitting wood grew louder, like a countdown. Then she stopped. She held up the final sheet. Her hand slightly trembling now, but not from fear, from weight. And this right here is the law that removed books about my people, about Harriet, about Malcolm, about Tulsa, Rosewood, redlining, Black Wall Street, gone from public schools. Just like that. Her eyes scanned the crowd slowly, forcing each face to meet hers. Gone like we were never here. Her tone didn't rise. Instead, it dropped into something almost sacred, a serenity that made the air feel dense. Let me ask you something, she said, taking one step forward off the platform, her heels clicking softly against the wood. When my history gets pulled off shelves, when my ancestors disappear from your school books, when children can name 3 Confederate generals but can't tell you who Fannie Lou Hamer was, who exactly is being protected? She paused. Her next words came like a whisper sharpened into a blade. Not me. Silence reigned. Even the air conditioning seemed to hush. The camera drifted across the audience. In the third row sat a young black woman, no older than 20. She clutched a small notebook to her chest, her pen frozen mid-sentence. A single tear slid down her cheek, catching the stage light as it fell. Not from pain alone, but recognition. Something ancient had stirred, and it had a name now. Crockett turned back to the podium, gathering the sheets she had scattered like receipts from generations of struggle. Her face didn't harden, it centered. And then she said it, the line that didn't need to be loud to echo forever. "I'm not asking for power so I can cry," she said, eyes unwavering. "I'm asking for power so I can be remembered." No sound followed. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not a single clap, because in that moment, even applause would have felt like an interruption. The stillness from Crockett's last blow hadn't faded. It had settled like a fog over the room, the kind that doesn't lift, only thickens with every breath. Everyone felt it, even those who pretended they didn't. But silence, Owens knew, was just another stage, and she wasn't about to share it. Owens moved with precision, as if every second of her rise had been choreographed long before tonight. She didn't look at Crockett. She didn't need to. Her attention was for the crowd, cameras, the control room, anyone who would take her voice as gospel. With a quiet click of her heel against the wood floor, she stepped to the center again, posture squared, chin raised, not out of arrogance, but strategy. She waited just long enough for the room to hold its breath before speaking. "Let's not get it twisted," she began, each word clean, deliberate, rehearsed but not robotic. "Emotions don't make policy. Complaints don't rewrite laws." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. The force came from her certainty, and the calm detachment she wore like armor. She glanced across the crowd, eyes sweeping from left to right as if measuring where her support sat. Then she continued. "Pain, no matter how eloquently performed, is not a political strategy." A few gasps rose, quickly muffled. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just let the silence grow, stretching it until it stung. And then came the line that cut. "The only people holding black folks back are the ones who keep telling them they can't move forward." It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. It hit like a hammer in a room full of glass. For a half second, the crowd paused, unsure whether to applaud or to process what had just landed. Then half of them, precisely half, began clapping, loud, intense, sharpened like approval given with purpose. The other half remained still, not in confusion, but conviction. Their silence wasn't absence. It was resistance. Jasmine Crockett stood like someone who just watched someone walk into a fire thinking it was a spotlight. She didn't rush the moment. She let it breathe. Let the applause echo, let the silence weigh heavier by contrast. Then, quietly, gracefully, she rose. Her fingers adjusted the edge of her jacket. Her eyes didn't drift to Owens. Instead, she turned to the people, to the room. Her walk was slow but unshakable, like someone who didn't need to shout to make the ground tremble. "You say it's not about emotion," she began, her voice low, her gaze anchored not on opposition, but on truth. "But maybe that's because emotion makes power uncomfortable." The words weren't just spoken. They were thrown like a rope into the crowd, waiting for someone to grab on. She took another step. "You say complaints don't make policy. Then let me ask you this. How do you write laws without listening to what's wrong?" She tilted her head slightly, letting the question linger. Somewhere near the back, a man uncrossed his arms. A young woman leaned forward. She didn't break eye contact with the crowd. She didn't need to. Her next words came quieter but heavier. "You speak well," she said. "But when you choose silence in the face of even the smallest injustice, you've already chosen a side." The room didn't break this time. It held. It held its breath, held its doubt, held its history because Crockett hadn't just rebutted. She had forced the room to confront its comfort and asked it to pick a side right then, right there. Not with applause, but with conscience. The silence was now no longer suspense. It had become pressure, like something about to crack. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached inside her blazer with the care of someone about to unveil not just evidence, but memory. From the inside pocket, she pulled out a thin manila folder. Its corners curled and soft from overuse. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. This folder had traveled with her through meetings, hearings, quiet nights, and raging thoughts. Now it was here under the lights where it belonged. She held it at her side for a moment, letting the room breathe, or maybe reminding them who was still in control of its rhythm. Then she stepped forward, slow and unflinching, each movement as if it were planned in advance, down to the angle of her shoulders and the firmness of her step. The crowd leaned in, not physically, but collectively. Their attention was magnetic. Even the cameramen held their frames a second longer than needed, anticipating something that no one could yet name. Then she looked at Candace Owens, not with rage, not even with disdain, but with the calm stare of someone who had outgrown the need to scream, and she spoke. "How many conferences have you spoken at?" she asked, voice even, but cold enough to burn. "How many checks have you cashed from donors who clap while our kids are pushed out of class?" The words didn't land with a bang. They slid in like a blade. Precision. Truth. Silence. There was a slight reaction from the audience, a low rumble like a subway train arriving in the distance. They weren't sure yet if it was safe to move. Some glanced at each other. Some looked at Owens. A few just stared at Crockett, waiting for more. She didn't let them wait long. From the folder she lifted a single sheet of paper, held it up gently, almost reverently. The stage camera zoomed in. There was a photo attached to the top. A boy, maybe 15, maybe younger, school uniform, locked hair, eyes that stared just past the camera, not into it. He looked resigned, not rebellious, alone, but familiar. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply let the silence hold his image. And then she said, evenly, "Because not once have I heard you mention the black boy in Texas who got kicked out of school for his hair." It was a sentence, but it hit like testimony. The backdrop behind them, a massive projection screen, lit up again with another image, news footage, the headline, "Student suspended over dreadlock sparks national controversy." This room didn't need headlines. It had faces, real ones. A student seated near the front, black, around the same age as the boy on screen, dropped his eyes and bit his lip. His mother reached over and touched his hand. One camera captured it all. Jasmine didn't turn away. She kept her body angled forward, but this time her gaze shifted directly into Owens. "You never said his name because it didn't serve your brand." There was no movement on the other podium. Owens stood still. Her lips pressed tightly. Her eyes didn't flinch, but something behind them did. A calculation perhaps, or the realization that Crockett wasn't finished. Because pain without applause is a burden you don't carry. It wasn't a yell. It wasn't even a rebuke. It was worse. It was exposure, not of actions, but of motives, the kind that peeled back not just the politics, but the armor. And then Crockett leaned in just enough to drop the final line. Her voice cool as ice and sharp as a needle. "You don't represent, you perform." The words detonated, not with volume, but with finality. The crowd erupted, not in cheering but in gasps, audible, tense. Some applauded instinctively, unsure if it was allowed. Others sat frozen, unsure if they could breathe. The moderator's hand hovered over the mic, uncertain whether to cut the tension or let it ride. Owens stood still for 3 full seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then, like a valve slowly releasing pressure, she stepped forward. Her voice was steady but deeper now, as if pulled from the very bottom of her conviction. "I don't need a seat at the table," she said. "I build my own." And in that moment, the debate didn't end. It hardened. Lines weren't just drawn. They were burned into the floor. No applause followed. Just silence again. Not because people were confused, but because they understood exactly what had just happened. No one left untouched. The weight of the debate had shifted. Gone were the fiery exchanges and verbal blows. In their place, something more sacred began to settle over the room. The moderator, aware that words had reached their edge, stepped forward with the caution of a man holding a lit match in a dry forest. "Before we close," he said, voice even but reverent, "we ask everyone to stand in honor of the giants who came before us. The civil rights leaders whose sacrifices built the path we're standing on now. John Lewis, Shirley Chisholm, Bayard Rustin, Ella Baker. The stage lights dimmed and the main screen glowed with a grayscale image of John Lewis at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. His knuckles clenched, coat flapping in the wind, pain carved into his brow. It wasn't a photo. It was a scar preserved in pixels. Slowly, people began rising. A ripple of reverence swept the room as if gravity itself urged them upright. Jasmine Crockett stood with them. No hesitation, no showmanship. Her eyes lifted toward the screen, and for a moment she wasn't in the debate hall, but back in a childhood church pew, watching elders whisper names that history had tried to bury. Her face didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It just stilled, as if every inch of her being understood what this moment required. Presence, not posture. But Owens remained seated, not slouched, not aloof, just frozen. Her arms crossed, gaze forward, body unmoving like a monument to defiance. Her refusal wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. The kind of silence that split the room like glass under pressure. Cameras caught it, and more importantly, so did the people. In the second row, a black grandmother, probably 75 if not more, lifted her chin. Her hands, veined and knotted from time, clutched a worn church program like a Bible. Her face didn't twitch, but when she looked at Owens, she shook her head once. Slow, the kind of shake that said, "You know better, or you should." Crockett saw her, and Crockett moved. She stepped off the stage, her feet barely making a sound now, not out of hesitation, but out of precision. Each stride toward Owens felt like a beat in a song only she could hear. The room stopped breathing. There was no music, but it felt like the score of a film was rising. Cello strings held in tension. She stopped just beside Owens's chair. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. She leaned in enough for the mic to catch it, enough for the world to hear, and said with a stillness sharper than thunder, "You don't have to stand because you never bowed." That was it. But it cracked something. Not in Owens. She didn't flinch. But in the air itself. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. The kind that tells you the ground just shifted, and no one wants to be the first to move. Flashbulbs fired in staccato bursts. Journalists stopped typing. Even the moderator lowered his gaze because they all knew, whether they agreed or not, that they had just witnessed the most devastating sentence of the night, one that needed no volume, only truth. And as lights began to fade to gold, the stage held its breath, no applause, no music, just the haunting, perfect stillness of a reckoning made personal. The silence from before hadn't faded. It had evolved from tension into something sharper. Suspicion. Crockett wasn't done. She had one final card to play. And it didn't come in a speech. It came sealed in truth. Jasmine Crockett moved like someone done waiting. She reached inside her blazer and pulled out something that didn't glitter, didn't shine, but still stole every eye in the room. A flat, thick envelope, gray and nondescript, except for the bold red stamp across its center, *confidential. Campaign strategy. Conservative Outreach Plan 2023, *. No theatrics, no drum roll, just facts printed, dated, and damning. The overhead lights hit the seal as she held it up, making the words burn slightly in the camera lens like a branded warning. It was the kind of envelope no one hands out at a press conference, the kind meant to stay hidden in back rooms and boardrooms. But here it was, out in the open, because someone decided enough was enough. Crockett unfolded one page with practiced care. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Quote, she read with chilling control. Leverage Candace Owens as a neutral black figure to front conservative messaging in vulnerable communities. Avoid explicit mentions of budget cuts to minority districts. The moment landed like a dropped hammer. Some heads turned. Others dropped. The air thickened. People weren't sure whether to be shocked or ashamed that they weren't shocked because the truth wasn't surprising. It was simply undeniable. Crockett didn't smirk. She didn't glare. She looked directly at Owens with the kind of steadiness that says, "I'm not here to insult you. I'm here to uncover you, *. You don't represent the community," she said, words sharp as broken glass under velvet. You represent a message written by people who needed a black face to say what they couldn't. Owens's jaw tensed, but she held the line. A second passed, then another. She leaned slightly forward, her laugh short, almost dry. Not confidence, not denial, just delay. I know what they wrote, she said, brushing it off with the edge of a weary smirk. But I say what I believe. Crockett didn't move. She didn't break her gaze. Her answer came slower, colder, like someone handing over a truth so heavy it could crack marble. But what you don't say, that's a choice, too. No one clapped. No one sighed. The entire room became a held breath because in that sentence, every policy she stayed silent on, every moment she chose not to speak, had just become visible. A ledger, a map, a mask peeled back. This wasn't about betrayal. It was about complicity. And in that instant, Owens didn't look like a symbol. She looked like a question. A question that every black viewer, every young activist, every parent in a forgotten district would be forced to answer for themselves. Asterisk, who really speaks for you? The person with the mic, or the one willing to lose everything to tell the truth? Asterisk. No applause, no camera pans, just stillness, heavy, unrelenting, true. The air hadn't moved in nearly a minute. After the last exchange, the room was locked in suspended breath. No whispers, no coughs, just eyes. Then the moderator leaned into the mic and with forced calm said, "We'll now open the floor for audience questions." The sentence broke the silence like a glass pane. Sharp, sudden, scattering tension across the room. No one reached for the mic right away. It was as if everyone needed permission to speak after what they'd witnessed. Then from the fourth row on the left, a hand lifted, hesitant at first, then steadier. It belonged to a black college student. Thin frame, glasses slightly askew, but eyes clear and full of something harder than confidence. Quiet truth. The mic was passed down slowly, hand to hand. The boy took it with both palms, gripping it like it might slip through his fingers. He stood. He swallowed. Then looking not at the stage, but straight into the middle of the room, he asked, "If both of you are black women, then why does it feel like we're being made to choose sides?" His voice didn't boom, but it didn't have to. The honesty in the question had a force all its own. The words cut through lights and branding, past camera flashes and talking points, and landed like a bare hand on a raw wound. On stage, both Owens and Crockett froze, not in defense, but in recognition. This wasn't a rhetorical challenge. It was a plea. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. A white-haired man crossed his arms. A young woman leaned forward with her hand over her mouth. It was no longer a debate. It was confession time, and the boy's question asked something neither side had been prepared to answer under bright lights. Crockett stepped forward first. No hesitation, no page flip. She looked at the boy and only him, with eyes that held both fire and fatigue. Her voice came soft at the edges, but anchored with steel. "You don't need to choose a side," she said. "You just need to choose the person who doesn't stay silent when you need someone to speak up." The sentence didn't land like applause bait. It landed like a shelter. The boy nodded once. No smile, no tears, just acknowledgement, like someone who'd waited too long to hear that sentence and finally had. But Owens didn't let it breathe. She leaned into her podium with purpose, like the next page of a script had been waiting for that moment. "And sometimes," she said, tone cooler, sharper, "silence is how we protect ourselves from the illusion of being represented." This time the room didn't react immediately. The sentence was dense, almost too dense, and its meaning made some blink before it hit. The illusion of being represented, the idea that someone who looks like you might still be speaking for someone else entirely. It wasn't applause she wanted. It was disruption. And she got it. A few nods, a few mutters, one low damn from the back. Then another voice. This one came slow, deliberate, and older. From the front row, a woman stood. She was in her 70s at least, skin the color of chestnut, with hair coiled into a silver bun wrapped in a patterned cloth. She wore a cardigan that looked hand-knitted and held herself like someone who'd sat through more community meetings than press events. She didn't ask permission. She just started speaking. "I just want to know," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "When policy starts hurting our children, which one of you is willing to sit at the table with the ones holding the power?" This wasn't a question to gain clarity. It was a test of courage, the kind that cut through theory, branding, and identity politics. "Which one of you will stay when the cameras leave?" Again, silence. Then Crockett answered, not from the podium. She stepped away from it, no microphone, just her voice. She looked straight at the woman and then deliberately let her gaze move across the room like a bridge being built. "I don't sit at tables," she said. "I knock on doors. And if those doors don't open, I come in through the side." No music played. No applause cue was triggered, but something shifted. One section of the audience, mostly the back rows, mostly younger, stood up, not to cheer, not to chant, but because they recognized the sound of a fight that wasn't theoretical. It was the sound of someone who knew what it felt like to be locked out, laughed off, or talked over, and showed up anyway. For the first time in an hour, Owens didn't move. Her hands rested firmly on the edge of her podium. She stared at the student who'd asked the question, not with anger, not even with contempt, but with calculation, as if deciding whether the conversation had slipped out of her control. The moderator didn't speak. No one cued the next segment. The entire room had paused like history itself was waiting to decide what to do next. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a mirror, and everyone was staring at their own reflection in it. The moderator barely had time to glance at her list of names before another voice rose, unprompted, unwavering. It didn't belong to a student or activist or a familiar face from the stage lights. It came from the audience's third row, where a woman in her mid-50s slowly stood up, straightening her posture like someone preparing not to question, but to bear witness. Her blazer was a faded green, modest, the kind worn not to impress, but to remember. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried with the kind of calm that silences noise without raising itself. "I'm someone who once donated to Candace's media project back in 2019. The room shifted, but not much. Just enough for attention to begin tilting her way. She stood firm, eyes locked on Owens, not accusing, not scolding, but looking through her like through a glass that had once been clear and now held too many smudges. There was no fanfare in her tone, no tears, no preamble. She didn't pause for effect. "Back then, I believed you were a new voice. Now, I'm not sure you can still hear your own silence. Hard silence. The kind that doesn't land. It hovers. 1 second. 2. A breath drawn but not released." Owens blinked slowly. Her face remained composed, but her fingers curled slightly against the sides of her notes, creasing paper that was now irrelevant. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Nothing she could say would undo what had just been said, because it wasn't a political critique. It wasn't a liberal attack. It was someone who once trusted her, now doubting if that trust had ever mattered. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak. She didn't even move. She understood the power of stillness. This wasn't her moment. This was history breathing and holding its breath. A single camera zoomed in on the older woman's hands. One wore a bracelet made of wood beads, aged and scuffed. A gift, maybe, from a protest or a daughter or a church circle that once sat in rooms dreaming of someone like Owens standing in the fire and not flinching. And now she wasn't sure that fire still lived in her. "It's not because you betrayed anyone," the woman added, softer now, but somehow sharper, like a whisper made of stone. "It's because you stopped listening to the people you once promised you'd never leave behind." Owens didn't flinch, but she didn't fight either. Her face held, but the air around her fractured. The weight of that sentence wasn't in its volume. It was in its accuracy. In the quiet heartbreak that isn't angry, only tired. Tired of hoping. Tired of explaining. Tired of watching.